Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. I am here with two guests today, here to talk all about Power Platform and recapping the recent Microsoft Power Platform Conference 2023. My guests are Asif Rehmani, founder and CEO of Visual SP, Steve Mordue, CEO of ForceWorks, and also creator of Rapid Start CRM. Hey guys, welcome.
Hey Jason, how are you?
Hey, great. Great to have you both here. Really excited to get some input from you from last week's event. I was not there, unfortunately. I planned to be, but couldn't be there because of illness. But I know you were both there. I watched as much as I could online. I got some reports from some great people at the event, including each of you, and really wanted to dive a little more into what you learned and kind of how you both came away from the event. Yeah, let's get into it. Asif, why don't you start? Are there sort of high level or sort of top line things you came away from the event with?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jason. This was the second time that Microsoft ever did this Power Platform conference. It's still new. And I remember the first time in Orlando, they actually ran out of space. So that's why they could not register any more people. And even that was around, if I remember correctly, about 3,000 or so people. This time, more than 6,400 people at the event. Of course, everybody combined, vendors, attendees, speakers, and all. 240 speakers, actually. That's a lot of speakers, a lot of content. Now, majority was Microsoft speakers, but then there's a bunch of community speakers like myself there as well. What I got out of that event in general, overall, is that there is truly extreme, authentic excitement around Power Platform, as it should be. It's giving creators a chance to create content from nothing, applications from nothing almost, or using stuff that they already have, like Excel spreadsheets or so forth. It's going to give leaders a chance to query their vast amount of data and get actual natural language English answers using Copilot and using just the whole plethora of content and technologies that Microsoft is creating. So there's something for everybody, for creators, leaders, everybody in between, and so forth. Excitement was definitely palpable, and it was huge, and I think it's going to get even bigger going forward. So excited to dig into it more with you and Steve.
Yeah, I think I was surprised by the number of users. Normally we go to these conferences, it's like 90% partners. This one, I don't know what the ratio was. It felt to me like maybe at least a third of the people at the event were end users. And this isn't like a UG event that's the target. It was just Power Platform, anybody who's interested. So that one surprised me a little bit. It was definitely a lot of excitement, a lot of new faces. I'm not a big fan of large events. You can't find anybody at them. The restaurants are all packed, but it is what it is, and it does create a lot more excitement.
Yeah, this event really seemed to me anyway, thinking back to last year and what you were both saying and sort of what I observed, it's really it feels like a community building effort because it's not the only thing that Microsoft does to sort of get the word out about Power Platform. Obviously, I mean, they have a launch event coming up online that's going to be more sort of globally accessible for people who couldn't, find the time or the expense to get to Las Vegas for this event. And that's coming up within the next week or two, right? But at the same time, this seems to be one of the events where Microsoft is making the biggest sort of push of its own, time and effort and resources to sort of get the word out about. I don't know. I mean, I think career building seems to be a big theme at these events. Obviously, there's product announcements and roadmap stuff. Again, you can get that elsewhere, but this is where they're trying to build excitement, I would say, among people who can be there.
Yeah. In fact, to put some numbers into what you just said right now, Jason, I have some notes in front of me. The 126,000 organizations supposedly are already using Copilot, is what they mentioned, and of which, well, actually even further than that, 22,000 learners have gone through the what's called a skill up program to get a lot more organizations, a lot more people into skilled up to use a Power Platform, and now the Copilot and everything else, uh, there is a lot of momentum for Microsoft, no doubt, for sure. But I think, as Steve mentioned also, this is not a user group event, right? And it was a big event. And it is a Microsoft come out party for these kind of things that they want to announce. So a lot of the content now is going to get torn apart by people who are going to be looking at it from all different angles. The Microsoft angle, but also the reality angle as to how much can be digestible by organizations. So much is being built so quickly and so much is being thrown to organizations so quickly. How much can they actually use? Can they uh, are they okay with the cost that they have to pay for many of these things? Are they going to be able to do it with the proper governance in place and so forth? And these user group summits that are coming up, like the one next week and others, I think they're just going to dig a lot more into many of these things to get a lot more reality in place, which is definitely needed.
One of the differences that occurs to me, if you contrast the Dynamics community like on its own, sort of separate from Power Platform. I know there's obviously overlap, and maybe we'll talk about that more. But the idea of users and direct Microsoft customers sort of working and getting hands-on with Power Platform is a really interesting, dynamic, if you will, and what that really means compared to being a user of a piece of enterprise software that Microsoft builds, because it's really kind of overlapping the realm of partners. And Steve, I know this is something you think about all the time. The idea of, working with a partner to develop a business application of any kind, whether it's Dynamics pre-built or whether it's something totally custom or sort of hybrid. And where that line is. Did you get any sense from Microsoft? Did they even touch on that that angle of things at this year's event? The idea of what customers can really kind of DIY internally with their own developers or citizen developers versus what partners should be doing for them.
Not all customers have developers. Enterprise customers may have a development team, but that's in quantity the smallest size market. There's much more customer in quantity of customer below that enterprise space, and a lot of those do not have any kind of development resources. I think again, I was continuing to hear this year the mantra that your mom can build this stuff. I mean, I think they really kind of are overselling a little bit. What a citizen without any kind of support from either a partner or development people on the team, people who understand architecture, are going to actually be able to accomplish. In the keynote, they showed several demos of Copilots in particular, but they showed a Copilot, working with a SharePoint list, and another Copilot working with an Excel list or Excel spreadsheet. And I understand for a demo, you need to have something simple so people grasp what's going on. And of course, it was amazing. But they did have the ability to go back into that data and modify it to make sure it produced an amazing result. And that was a pretty limited piece of data. So I think, as Asif said, this isn't reality, right? This is demo. It looks great in the demo. I think customers are going to go back, try some of this stuff, and it's not going to look anything like the demo. The one thing that Charles said almost as an aside during the keynote was, by the way, if your data is shit, none of this is going to work. And then kind of moved on quickly. But that was probably the most important thing that was said in that entire 2 hours for people to understand how they may be able to get value out of Copilots. And we've done a lot of experimenting with Copilots, and they're pretty incredible if the data is in the proper condition. And it's not just stuff like deduplicating and stuff like that. It's normalization of the data so that this thing can reason over it. You look at any spreadsheet, and you'll find people put text in phone number fields or all sorts of messiness, and Copilot just chokes on all that stuff. So I think that's going to be the challenge for customers and Microsoft. My fear is that a lot of customers are going to go, hey, let's try out this Copilot, and because their data is in terrible condition, it's not going to give them anything usable. And they're going to say, this Copilot, this is just a fad. So Microsoft really needs to push more than just a side comment, this concept of don't expect much from Copilot until you get your data house in order, and then tell people how to do that. He did mention Fabric, and Fabric is going to be a big part of getting that data in order, but that's just like one piece. So yeah, there's some education to be done on that side before people get too excited about Copilots.
Yeah, I was trying to, I always try not to get too excited about some of the claims I hear with AI and Copilot. I was also trying to sort of see where the most realistic sounding or feasible the things that I could buy into. I think you touched on some of it there. One of the things I thought that was most interesting, just from a sort of pure Copilot side of the world, was two things. One was kind of the reliance on Power Virtual Agent capabilities within a Copilot features of Power Apps. I think it sounded like Ryan Cunningham really kind of stressed how important that was going to be if you're going to sort of add Copilot-based capabilities to a Power App. PVA will be driving that in a sense on the back end, or you can set it up that way. And to me, that sounded like okay, like that actually makes sense. I don't know how advanced that is or how like sophisticated that approach is. If maybe it's just more practical, but it certainly sounds like a bit of a foundational step that maybe is going to be really helpful for getting bringing actual if you want to call it actual Copilot, maybe actual large language model stuff into people's apps in a way that's more, I don't know, accessible or doesn't seem like magic. And so that was sort of a foundation. To me, it almost feels like a foundational element of what Microsoft's sort of building foundational things at the same time as they're trying to build the top line, flashiest things at the same and sort of make it all move forward so that nothing really falls apart at the same time. I don't know. Any thoughts? Is that PVA stuff interesting to you, or were there other elements of, the Copilot messaging that sounded very particularly realistic? Asif, what do you think?
Regarding PVAs and just bots in general, also, if you pointing an agent, in this case a virtual agent, to a data, but of course, as Steve mentioned, the data has to be in good condition. Good data in, good answers out. That's at the end of the day, that's what's going to happen. But as you mentioned also that the foundation has to be strong, and Microsoft is leading and moving so quickly in all of these things that I fear, as actually Steve mentioned before, that how many of these organizations are going to start using a lot of these things and feel disappointed when they don't get the same results that they saw in the keynote or in a session with Ryan Cunningham or other places like that. None of this stuff is going to be magic, right? It's a co-pilot, and it's going to help you. Like the analogy that comes to my mind with any of these things is it's going to get you started. Many people, anything from writing an essay to a resume to whatever, let's keep it something completely basic in Microsoft Word, have trouble starting. And Copilot lets you start, but it does not give you a finished product. It just gets you, a good percentage there, depending on how good your data is to begin with. After that, you're still responsible. If we go down a route where everybody has access to Copilot and all these technologies, and everybody starts creating things and they get stuck, which is going to inevitably happen, and then they start going to their IT department saying, hey, well, this is not working, that's going to be a much bigger mess than the organizations are signing up for. So I think the expectations have to be correct as to what they're getting in terms of all these technologies. A great starting point, actually, but not going to be a finished product, especially for people who are real end users.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you were talking about with, I don't know if you used the word bottlenecks, but that was what popped into my head. The idea that, there's the classic bottleneck of technical debt with custom applications out in the world, for the last 20, 30 years or whatever, that IT teams have always dealt with. And it just strikes me that the governance is so important and the management tools are so critical here that, if they don't keep up, that people are literally just going to, I think, build a few apps and get them, a little further down the road than they would have done with, with their own sort of haphazard app building, but not far enough, right? It'll just kind of it'll just sort of shift things a little bit in terms of technical debt, but then they'll still hit the same bottlenecks, a tiny bit further down the process if the governance is not there, right? And that's where some of the Copilot stuff really, is critical. I mean, I noted one update, like the ability to kind of write documentation when an app is created so that IT can actually understand what each one is all about. That sounds pretty useful to me. The ability to sort of quickly assess everything that's out there. Another one that I have sort of noted kind of almost in the lead up to this event was some debate around the what's it called, the Power Platform. Yeah, is it Center of Excellence?
It is,
templates
yeah.
that are sort of a starting point that people can use, right? And then there's managed environments, which are sort of developing at the same time as more of something Microsoft's selling as an option that has a lot of the ALM capabilities and presumably governance too. There's a lot more, it seems like, that's going to be decided or evolve out of that in terms of what some of the best practices are, and I think that'll drive results too for clients in terms of, do they hit bottlenecks? I don't know. Do you agree? Is that something that you've been watching?
You're talking
Steve?
to me?
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a little disappointing that managed environments has a cost, because managed environments is what you need to get into pipelines, and pipelines is just going to ultimately create a better end experience for everybody involved, including Microsoft. And it seems like with the cost of these products, it wouldn't have been that big a deal just to give an option for this to be a managed environment or not, and not have a cost ramification to it. I think that would have been, the uptake on it would be even better. And pipelines is, a little different than full ALM, but it's a key component to keeping these things in place. And on your mention of Power Virtual Agents, my opinion that it's kind of low hanging fruit for something like, ChatGPT, to GPT. I always get those mixed, to deal with, because it's already similar. What Power Virtual Agents gives is another filtered pipe for this stuff to go through. It's coming from OpenAI, it's going into Azure OpenAI, and then instead of just stopping there and launching your Copilot from there, you can push it through Power Virtual Agents. It gives you a little more control. You can finesse the results a little better. And I think Power Virtual Agents is an excellent use case right now. The other one that is surprisingly good is code. Copilot and GitHub, even just regular ChatGPT is very good at code if you know a couple of tricks. I found it to be the laziest developer I've ever met. You'll ask it to, I don't know, write me a JavaScript on a form to do something when something happens, and it'll spit something out for you that looks pretty good. And I've learned if all you say to it is, that is not correct, it'll respond, oh, you're right, it's not correct. And here's a corrected version. And then once again, say, that is not correct. Oh, you're right. Here's a correct. You keep saying that is not correct with no more direction than that. Eventually it gets to a piece of, ready to use code. It's just copy and paste it right into your application. But it is like the laziest developer on the team that you have to go back to 3 or 4 times to get what you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just seeing something of the same analogy, that half of what certain jobs are is copying and pasting other people's code, and yeah, certainly a known pattern, right? that
that's the whole development world. We've all been copying and pasting forever.
Yeah, and then crossing your fingers and hoping that it holds up. Yeah, certainly can understand that. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the other ones, just to mention a couple that I'm less impressed with. I'm less impressed with the idea that people can build their own portals in Power Pages.
He said it was simple. He said it was simple several times.
Okay, well, sorry. Okay, no, but I mean, I've sat in on enough. We host a portals community call every month, and you look at the depth and the complexity of what it takes to really build a useful portal. I'm a total amateur at it, but from what I've just absorbed, yeah, it doesn't sound realistic to me at all. What does sound realistic is some of the stuff that's built into enterprise software, into D365 marketing or whatever, where you can build you can generate content quickly. That sounds more useful if your data house is in order. But another one that seemed still less likely is even describing flows, through natural language. I think there are certain elements of generating flows that could definitely be useful. It sounded like that was one of actually the biggest responses, at least kind of people reflecting on social media during the event, was the enhancements to Power Automate authoring. But
it was funny that within the Power Automate part of the keynote, I don't know if you got the same feeling that I did, Steve, that the most applause came when they showed the zoom in functionality. And they showed that you have more space to write your formulas.
Yeah.
Things that should have been there years ago, many years ago. I've talked to many Power Automate experts, and they say, well, this was a long time coming. This was a very low-hanging fruit that Microsoft should have fixed a long time ago. So that is honestly...
I picked up on that too from afar.
Practically, that was the most, I can use this today and be more productive applause that most people got. That gave. Now, having said that, what you mentioned before, basically providing some natural language instructions saying, here's the scenario that I want, and having it produce a Power Automate flow with the appropriate recurrence, the looping, and everything else, it does actually, from what I've seen, even apart from the keynote, it does do a decent job, once again, to get you started in the right direction. What the word lazy that Steve actually used as I'm going to use that, is this is my fear, that people don't get lazy in such a point that say, that Copilot is going to do everything for me when I give it the instruction, because it's not. It's truly a Copilot and not a pilot. It's going to help you, but it's not going to do your job for you. And if you just give it instructions which are okay but not great and say, well, here's my result, and just move forward with it, you will be disappointed, in my opinion, at least right now, maybe years to come. There has to be that human involvement where you have it use the Copilot definitely to get you a good start, 20, 30, 40, even more %. But then after that, you take over and you go from there. That's a very important point, I think, that everybody needs to remember.
I think you really hit on something with the give it proper instruction. We're asking people that have no idea about any of this stuff. How could we possibly expect them to give it proper instruction to get a result? Because they just don't understand what's even possible to know how to ask. I recently did a blog series I was calling "Sally in HR Has a Business Problem," where I kind of walked through this path a little bit over like seven episodes of a business person, an intelligent business person trying to go down that citizen path. And using some of these tools and some of the hurdles that they run into. And the conclusion of that thing, of course, is they ended up bringing in a partner. And so because I write about a lot of that stuff, a lot of customers that are reaching out to us because they've got some disastrous results from, not having proper knowledge behind what they're doing. And one of the tools that I was quite pleased with, or features, in the Power Automate, was the ability to take this ridiculously huge flow that some citizen built with, 87 forks and loops and stuff like that, and just be able to go in the side pane and say, what does this do? And have it go through this nightmare maze and come back with kind of a summary that, oh, this does this when that happens and does that. And that was a pretty valuable feature for anybody following behind, or any partner maybe coming to clean up a mess, to be able to understand what that thing was doing. And of course, you immediately realize it has 87 more steps than necessary to do what it's doing. But that was a cool tool.
One question I was a little unclear on from the event, and this changes course a tiny bit here, but was this event as useful if you were someone who is really using Power Platform just with Microsoft 365, as opposed to an organization that's paying for the more full-featured, sort of enterprise capabilities with advanced connectors and so forth? Did it serve both of those audiences?
I think when you mentioned the numbers, I don't know if that was in the pre-call or if it's been mentioned here, of the growth in the Power Platform. They don't really break it down for you of whether that was Canvas stuff living in Office 365 or model-driven and Canvas stuff living on Dataverse. I think the vast majority of those users are coming from the Office 365 side because it's free. And that's one of the challenges we have, that Microsoft kind of created this problem for all partners, is customers think they have Power Apps because they see it in Office 365, have no idea there's another Power Apps of the same name over here that is completely different, all relational database related, and they're building stuff on SharePoint or Excel because that's what they think Power Apps is. I build a little Canvas app, and it's on Excel and SharePoint, and I know all about Power Apps. That was my other post, the mountain of shitty little apps. That's how that comes about, is because people just have no idea there's even a whole other side to this.
Almost like they're living in a separate world. You think, like they're not even aware of
just blinders, just blinded. Yeah. Microsoft has not been clear enough on the messaging. They should have called Power Apps Lite, Power Apps Pro, to give it some distinction so people at least knew there was something other than what they're using. But they're just using Power Apps. So they have to be pretty confused when they walk into a session on model-driven apps because they haven't seen that stuff before. Have no idea what that is.
That did happen, actually, at the conference, because when a conference session title just says Power Apps, or even the description just says Power Apps, and it's not specifying if it's Canvas app or model-driven app, people are confused when they go in with one expectation or the other. There was one session that Lisa Crosby and Shane Young did, actually. I'm glad they did this session, which was basically Canvas apps versus model-driven apps, which one you should think about and why. But there was not as much distinction aside from that. And audiences coming from the SharePoint, Teams, Microsoft 365 side is all thinking Canvas. As you mentioned also, of course, the Dynamics or model-driven folks are thinking about it from a different perspective. So different
I wish that session had been recorded, because and Microsoft, everybody should promote the hell out of that to help
absolutely
give that awareness.
Completely agree. And as a person myself, Jason knows this, for my history for a long time, I came from the SharePoint side of things, deep into that, and Teams and so forth. So coming from that, when I remember going into this model-driven world about 5-6 years ago, it was confusing to me as well, to understand that. So I can definitely see that confusion right now with other people. Microsoft does need to do a much better and clearer job to help people understand exactly what's in it for you, depending on what you need and what your expectations are for your business. I agree. It would have been really good to have different names altogether, but I think it's too late for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think they can't avoid trying to do it both ways, because the Microsoft 365 side, from a kind of a corporate performance of Microsoft side of things, and I think they're trying to serve this up in a way that analysts can understand in terms of their strategy, but then they're also trying to serve people like both of you and this broader, the type of people who are at this event, who are really thinking about business solutions at the same time. It's a very tricky balance there, and licensing has been one of the biggest complaints, I think, or frustrations, I would say, of Power Platform for the people on the ground trying to make it work, right? Trying to navigate that and the right access and the right permissions.
Licensing is complex, but it's necessarily complex, unfortunately. I'd love to say they should just simplify this down to like 3 SKUs, but it's just not possible. And I can understand why. It's a necessary evil, that licensing is complex. And the challenge, lots of people don't understand licensing. Lots of partners don't understand licensing. I get stuck frequently on licensing. It's not an easy thing, but I think it is necessarily complex. And to the point about the naming, we have the same problem with Dynamics 365. When they dropped everything else, we get a significant number of customer inquiries looking for Dynamics 365 finance and operations. Well, we don't do ERP. So we have the same challenge with Dynamics 365 and confusion about what that is, as we do with Power Apps. I think they could easily do a better job there.
Okay. One kind of parting note I would add to this conversation. We haven't talked much about Fabric. We mentioned it, but it's an area where, boy, I still feel personally like it's a lot of the data science elements and some of the more advanced data concepts are a little over my head. But it sure seems like an important area in conjunction with Power Platform going forward. Certainly not a citizen developer type of thing, although it does look like the easiest or sort of most sort of software as a service version of what it is that Microsoft has ever kind of put out there. And it seemed like at the event it was very popular too. Any other thoughts about that as in terms of its importance or perhaps its impact in each of your worlds, Asif?
I would much rather have Steve go on this one first, actually. This is a more technical area. Yeah.
Fabric is going to be a key critical component to the success of Copilot. If you're just going to point Copilot at a big pile of data, it's just not going to work for you. Fabric, part of the goal of Fabric is to get data from multiple sources into a single place where it can be cleaned up, normalized, and then sent back to the source where it came, and then used by Copilot with much higher success. So anybody thinking about Copilot needs to definitely spend a little homework on Fabric first. One of the other features I saw, which I think a lot of customers are going to be interested in, is this long-term retention capability they added to Dataverse. I don't know how many customers we have that are over capacity, and it seems like no matter what you do, it's very difficult to get back within your capacity without just buying more data. But what this will allow you to do is, kind of select a set of data or create some rules around some data and push it off into, like cold storage. I mean, it's not a new concept, but it's new for us here at a much, much lower cost. So when you think about, oh man, I need to retain, emails for 7 years from all of our customers. Well, maybe 2 years from now, push them off into cold storage, get them out of your capacity. They're still accessible. You can bring stuff back in or go look at it. But I think that's going to be a huge saver for people that are staring at that overcapacity, waiting for Microsoft to come up with enforcement and cause a problem, or having to cough up all this money. That's going to be something that everybody who's looking at your overcapacity should go do some research on, because I think that's going to solve it for a lot of people, or could.
Was Dataverse well represented at the event? I recall from last year, I thought it was. But now thinking about this year's event, I just didn't see very much from the outside.
It wasn't.
Not?
Neither was Microsoft Fabric, actually, for that matter.
Copilot sucked up all the oxygen.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. You took the words out of my mouth. One of the presenters actually joked about it, but it was not really a joke. That saying the word Copilot was a necessity. It was like a mandatory thing that everybody had to do in every session, no matter what the session was about. Did suck.
We talked in the pre-call about this being one of the rare occasions where Microsoft has been ahead of everyone else in a piece of technology. They're typically more familiar with waiting for other people to build something interesting, see if it catches on, and then go take over and just make it better and dominate it. But they're in a unique position now of being in front and having people watch what they're doing. Now we're starting to see Salesforce, starting to see other people out there, jumping in because they really don't have a choice. It's clearly gotten the attention of the world. So the competitive battle's just begun, but Microsoft's in the unusual position of being on top and trying to defend the hill instead of, attacking the hill. We'll see how that works for them.
Completely agree. And that's definitely, as you mentioned, a unique position that Microsoft has not found itself in most of the technology that they've rolled out. It doesn't matter if it's hardware or software over the decades, at least that I've been following and have had my career tied to it.
Yeah, go all the way back to Lotus 1, 2, 3 and Excel battle, Word Star and Word battle. I mean, they waited, and once something got popular, just came in and elbowed their way to the top.
You got it. Netscape to Internet Explorer, WordPerfect to Word, Lotus to other things to Excel, finally. So yeah, the questions that have come up at this conference and others that I've been to, like for example, the Microsoft 365 conference that happened before and others, have been very similar. That there's a lot coming our way, our meaning the end user, the organizations that actually have to use it in production. People are already grappling, of course, with the PII scenarios, the security questionnaires that everybody has to fill out these days, the SOC, the ISO compliance, and everything else. This complicates things a whole lot more at a very different level. At such a deep, deep level that no one has even thought about it as to what the right questions are to ask, because things are changing and as innovating so quickly. There's a term, I'm sure both of you have heard this, drinking from a fire hose, that I've heard almost every Microsoft employee say that when they enter Microsoft, that's what it feels like. Oh, there's so much information coming my way. And that's been like that since the beginning. But now customers are feeling the same way, where there's just so much being thrown. Every week, something is being added and innovated and everything else. And while it's wonderful and it's great, I fear and wonder if the foundations are strong enough to be able to withstand all that innovation so it doesn't fall apart. These questions of data security, the questions of is my data as an organization being used to train your AI, Microsoft, and same question for any other vendor. These are important questions. What am I exactly getting that for all of my users if I go with Copilot or any other AI technology? Does everybody need to have a license? There's many, many different questions that came out of this conference and others that I think are just going to escalate more and more as people look to actually practically integrate their business processes with AI that Microsoft is putting out so fast. So
I would agree. I would also say that customers probably feel it's more like a water hose because they're not as focused on what's happening as partners. For partners, it's an absolute fire hose. Customers aren't watching all this stuff as closely as we have no choice but to watch. So they actually have no idea the size of that fire hose because they've got it filtered down to a little water hose and they're still feeling overwhelmed. So they just have no idea how much is happening.
Perhaps a good place to end. And Asif, to your point, there are more events coming up where we'll sort of see how Microsoft's messaging on this evolves. Will they redouble their efforts to kind of make people feel secure about what Copilot's actually doing, how other features out in the products kind of integrate with it, and where customers should be making those investments. A lot of things that remain to be seen here as we kind of move through this conference kind of period of the end of 2023 here. Thanks
It'll
to
be
both
fun
of you so
and
much.
terrifying to watch.
Do either of you want to call out anything? I know you've both been writing. Anything else you want to kind of call people's attention to, Steve? Maybe give that to you first. I know you
They
mentioned.
can follow me at stevemordue.com, and I've been getting a little more active on LinkedIn than I had been in the past. I kind of dropped Twitter because it doesn't seem as appropriate for business conversation as it once was. So that helped me kind of focus some efforts on LinkedIn so they can find me there if they want to connect. And the blog is stevemordue.com.
Thanks. And Asif?
first of all, Steve, I've read your writing as well, and I appreciate the stuff you're putting out. Keep doing it, please. I'm also one
No
of your
problem.
readers. My writing, I do a lot of it at LinkedIn, as you've seen also, Jason, I'm sure. My name, Asif Rehmani, for those of you who are just listening and not looking at the show notes. Look me up on LinkedIn. That's where I do a lot of my writing. And then our blog writing, basically my blog writing and others go into our company blog. So that's visualsp.com. That's where you're going to find that. And that's where I'll be putting out a lot of these perspectives. And I got to say at the end over here, I think everybody knows this, but not everybody calls this out, that there's a lot of good knowledge coming out, but it's coming out from two different perspectives. One is the Microsoft perspective, which is a great perspective, but it's very biased to their products and licensing and everything else. Then there's the perspective that folks like Steve, myself, and others are putting out as Microsoft MVPs. I think people should be looking at both perspectives to get a complete story of where they should be investing and where they should be asking the right questions for their business.
As a fellow member of the Mutual Admiration Society, I also read all of your stuff.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that.
Well, thanks to both of you for being here. Great conversation. I really appreciate it.
See ya.
Pleasure.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Asif Rehmani and Steve Mordue for joining me today. We will put some links into the show notes for all of their information. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. All of our updates, please do follow us on social media. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.